Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. This week's episode, another installment of Rapid Fire Q&A. So, let's kick it. First question, thoughts on training and upper body hypertrophy and lower body strength in the same cycle?
Yeah, there's no real issue with it. So obviously when you're programming for the overall intensity and the volume of macrocycle, it's a lot more straightforward to have matching goals throughout everything. But there's no reason why, especially for more advanced trainees, that you can't have more than one goal, especially for upper versus lower body. They're going to be done in different days, so it's not like you're sending very, very mixed signals within the same session. So all you can do, or all you have to do, is program the macro cycle slightly different for both goals. And it's something that when you have shorter time frames that you might have to do in like sports performance and stuff, like say for lower body it's a more of a power orientated goal, where upper body is still you're trying to use or maximize strength. You could have different goals, and all you do is just program the variables slightly different for the upper body versus the lower body.
I would just be careful if this person by hypertrophy, they mean like the
bodybuilding style.
Yeah, the crazy, like super high, metabolic stress type. This, I'd be careful a little bit.
You would use the hypertrophy more that we teach in like the periodization course versus the hypertrophy specialization course.
Yeah, like if it's just like hypertrophy in the sense of standard strength development with a hypertrophy bias, I don't think there's an issue like Porrick was saying, but it might just be a little trickier if you're doing like real strength. So let's say like 6x4 for lower body, but then you're doing like giant set for upper body. That might affect like
the recovery,
like overall recovery a little bit.
Yeah. And then, but there's even no reason why you couldn't, like, you can always put like certain things on maintenance. So say you're like, if you just want to maintain lower body strength and size, you can do that with a very low volume of work and higher intensities. That is not really a big deal. So you can drive the strength there while doing what you want with the upper body. But definitely what Steph was saying, like in context of like the giant sets and stuff like that, doesn't really work because it's such contrast in gold and it's so hard in the recovery. But with standard strength training, that if we're saying hypertrophy in terms of we're going to drive the volume a little higher and we're going to work our sets slightly closer to failure, yeah, there should be no issue there at all.
Next question. For the incline dumbbell curl, you have 45, 55, and 65 degrees specified in the exercise database. Is a higher degree variation more advanced or the other way around?
The other way around. So the like 65 degrees, it's a smaller stretch at the origin of the bicep, so it's a little less stress for someone who's tighter, and somebody who's more flexible, they can afford to go down to 55, 45, maybe even 35 if you're really flexible.
Yeah, in regards to like the exercise database, we put the exercises that you most commonly use overall, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can't go one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, of course, not all variations are in the exercise database. Like you said, we're just focusing on the most common ones, the main ones.
Yeah. How many sets per week are required for strength above 80% 1RM?
Like 20 to 40 reps on average.
Sets or reps?
Well, the sets is the question.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, like, because it depends if you're talking about like for one movement pattern versus a totality. So, if say we're just talking about one movement pattern, realistically, you could probably make progress with 3 sets per week, strength wise, over 80%. But that's to me on the low end. Like, I think, like, and obviously. But you can obviously build strength below 80% as well. Like it's a funny question. It is some people do program in this way that they're going to do a total amount of sets. Okay, they're going to disperse it throughout the week no matter what. And some of them are going to be over 80%. Some of them like that is a way people program. It's just not really how we do it.
I don't think it's the best way to program.
No,
I think it's way too limiting.
Yeah.
And it opens to too many mistakes. Like, to use that approach assumes that every set has equal value.
Yes.
Which is so false, because if you're looking at, and this again, it comes from like those quote unquote new hypertrophy people, and like 3 sets of quad on a leg extension is not the same drain on the recovery curve as 3 sets of quads coming from a back squat. Yep. So, like Boric was saying, to have like very specific like set target, it's misleading because we don't know what we're talking about here. Are we talking about sets of dips, or are we talking about sets of press downs?
Yeah.
Like,
is it like
so? So I cannot give you a magic bullet on number of sets for an intensity when the intensity is dissociated from the exercise at which you're training it. Because 80% on a squat is not the same thing as 80% on a shrug.
But then it also depends on the reps that you're doing, right? Because if you're doing 2 reps versus 6 reps, like,
I mean, like who would do 2 reps at 80%?
Above 80%, I was thinking, not just 80 at 80%.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
true. Like the amount of reps you're doing above 80% also has an impact on the amount of sets you're doing.
Yeah, then the amount of times you're training that movement pattern per week is going to make a difference, because if you're training it once per week, you're going to have to do more sets than if you're training it 2 to 3 times per week, because the frequency just won't have the same training effect as a higher frequency. So it just gets a little convoluted to give a very, very precise set number.
And then are you training at, I'm just going to take the 80%, like very narrow, but are you training at 80% for functional hypertrophy purposes, or are you training at 80% for relative strength purposes? Because that too will affect the number of sets being performed.
Yeah.
The people that look at it like this, is it also something where they are the ones that don't really look at periodization?
It's hard to know.
Yeah, kind of.
But like sometimes, because even some Olympic lifters somewhat look at it like, oh, I'm going to do 3 sets above 80% this week and 1 set above 90%. And like they do their long-term planning as a somewhat overview that way.
Yeah, but for them, to me, it makes sense because the sport it's apples to apples.
Yeah.
Oh, I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like we don't know exactly what this person's asking about, so it gets hard to answer.
But it's just like from my experience, from what I can see being done now, when it comes to total amount of sets per week, it's a nondescript. They take a body part. So let's say the delts, and then it doesn't matter what exercise you're doing as long as the delt is targeted in it. They count it as a set, irrespective of if it's a machine, a single joint, a multi-joint, a compound movement, Olympic lift. It's almost like it doesn't matter to them, and we're looking at 10 to 20 sets per week per muscle, so it doesn't matter as long as you have like 3 exposures of this or 1 exposure, like. But that's just so not how we program at all.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Can you go over how you would manipulate conditioning programs based on the phase of training you are in?
Well, they're saying phase. I'm assuming they're using
accumulation.
No, they're talking about mesocycle.
Yeah. So it depends. For most Gen Pop, it doesn't really, it's not going to be the end of the world. The big thing, because I know one of the things in sports performance is to somewhat try and alternate between, like have an inverse relationship between, if you're doing high intensity stuff in the gym, you're going to do the lower intensity stuff as part of your conditioning. For Gen Pop, they are not highly wired enough to worry about that. So then if you're going to do it, if it doesn't really matter, it just makes sense to follow what the overarching goal of the phase is. So you're in an accumulation phase. We're going to work on more of the
Like the longer time under tension.
Longer time under tensions, or a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, so it's slightly more aerobic power dominant. And then if you're moving into intensification phase, you can work on more the power side of like the lactate system, or if you really want alactic capacity or alactic power. But again, it's very, very minimal transfer for Gen Pop people. Or
yeah, because I feel like with Gen Pop, you're just trying to drive more results in terms of physical changes with conditioning.
Yeah, you're not trying to get like stronger or faster or
if there's a very specific adaptation that you're looking for, because there's a very specific end goal, that answer completely changes, because that the end goal becomes what is the driving factor. But without a specific end goal, there's no real right or wrong way of doing it. It's whatever way it's going to work best for that client.
And then it's also understanding that it doesn't matter as much with the Gen Pop, because their overall training volume and frequency is not that high. So if you're only like strength training 2 to 3 times a week, and you're doing some form of cardiovascular work 2 to 3 times a week, it's just not enough overall total work to truly demand a complex planning of conditioning.
Yeah. Like as much as people wouldn't want to hear this, 5 hours of training per week isn't that much. Yeah. Like it's a great goal for 99% of the people, but when people really dig down deep into the things you have to manipulate to really optimize performance, the people they're looking at are doing 12, 15, 20 hours of training per week. It's a completely different story. That is their life. So they have to have every point of their training perfect, or they're not going to recover. Whereas 5 to 6 hours, you're going to be okay as long as you're being somewhat reasonable with your choices.
Yeah, so even if you're saturating like the volume aspect of cardio and the volume aspect of strength within one phase at 5 training units per week, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Would you change your periodization model throughout the course of a football soccer season? Example, linear model in off early preseason, then undulating in competition, or keep the same model throughout?
No, I wouldn't keep the same model. I mean, during the season, Porrick, would you agree that we'd probably stick to some form of daily undulating?
Yeah, some form of daily undulating, because we just want to maintain multiple different qualities. So obviously you want to maintain some level of hypertrophy. It's not massively important for soccer, but you need some level of hypertrophy. You want to maintain strength, you want to maintain power. And the best way to be able to maintain these multiple qualities is constantly touch them, so we're not moving away from them for a long period of time, because that's the issue with linear periodization. We say you're going to set up a 16-week long linear periodization, and we're going to start with hypertrophy and we're going to end with power. Okay, so during the hypertrophy phase, you're going to decrease performance because you're training hypertrophy, so you're going to be increasing soreness, you're going to be reducing recoverability within season, which is not what you want. Then you're going to have a strength phase, things are going to be fine, but again, there's going to be a downgrade in performance. Then you're going to have a power phase, and everything's going to be good, but you're 12 weeks into your programming, you've already messed up the season. Whereas if we're going daily undulating and we're touching things and we're organizing things within the week to suit the schedule of the competition, then we can touch everything, maintain, slightly improve everything throughout the season without decreasing recoverability and reducing performance.
Like the non-touching of qualities, which makes the daily undulating super beneficial for in-season training with these long sports, like Porrick said, has to do with the fact that you don't want to detrain anything with a long season. And the perfect example of it, like we're seeing it right now during the NFL preseason, is just the first 2 weeks of preseason. Already we've seen a bazillion blown knees already from like I think they had 1 or 2 shoulder pad practices yet. So they're not even contact injuries. They're all like soft tissue change of direction type of injuries. But why? Well, we could assume that a lot of them spend their off season either not running at high velocities at all, or because I know a lot of them go and run routes and all that kind of stuff, but if you're running routes at half speed, just running around, And then you get into like training camp all of a sudden, and now you need to go balls to the wall because you're fighting for your position. Well, the tissue is not ready for it. You haven't done anything at super high velocity. So even though you had great training per se in the weight room, something's going to give because you're not prepared for it. So, like making sure you're able to maintain in training throughout the seasons, to me, is like super important.
Yeah, because even if you go as far as like, obviously you can't control every variable in people's trainings, but going from different surfaces is going to make a huge difference because the level of compliance that the surface is going to give you back. So grass versus turf. If they're doing their run or routes in sneakers versus cleats, going to make a difference. How quickly they can grab ground, create friction, change direction. So all these here can play into it. So if people aren't taking some level of specificity to what they're going to need to do come the pre-season, there is a greater chance. There's always a chance of someone blowing a knee, but there's a greater chance because you haven't been exposed to those velocities yet, those torques yet. So there's a lot to it.
Ready, Alex?
Uh-oh.
To what extent do hormonal changes, both perimenopause and menopause, affect strength ratios in women?
I don't think your hormonal level will affect your strength ratios in terms of from one movement to another. I mean, your hormonal fluctuations might affect your strength overall in terms of what you can do in terms of output, if you have the energy to do it. But in terms of ratios, I don't think it'll affect a movement pattern per se.
Yeah, my thing, because I know we had discussed this too, is for sure there's not research on this specific question in terms of hormonal fluctuations in women and the effect on strength ratios. But when we look at strength ratios, we're just looking for a good balance.
Yeah, between pressing and pulling and all the lifts. Yeah, for sure.
But you would say that for women as they age, we know we need to prioritize keeping muscle on because it does become more difficult. So you may see because
it might be harder to maintain your
higher
strength,
levels of strength.
But you can still, if you never stop, then you won't lose it so much. But it's definitely more like how it affects your energy overall. But there's also been studies in terms of like your menstrual cycle, like, you know, how people like to match their menstrual cycle to different things. If you're the type of person that you're affected so much by your hormonal cycle and the PMS and all that, then you can start to adjust your training. But I mean, women can be super strong even in the week before their period or the week after or whatever. So it's very, very dependent on the person.
Now this is a stretch, like that's more of a food for thought thing, and I thought about it like last week. But do you think that maybe, and I'm like, this is layered and very indirect, but if as you have hormone imbalances post menopause, and because of this you become weaker, knowing that females are typically weaker specifically in the overhead pattern of pressing, if then maybe that drop in strength magnifies on the overhead press pattern compared to the other one, and then maybe you can see a drop in overhead strength ratio.
I mean, it could, but it could also be just, you know, if your estrogen levels are decreasing, you're more susceptible to injury. The tissue doesn't recover as well. The ligaments are so it's like maybe all those things that will then inherently affect your overhead pressing. It's a more, vulnerable position for people anyways, but I mean, it's possible. I like where you're going.
Another slight curveball for this question is, instead of, because they just said strength ratios, but what about they meant relative strength ratio?
So in terms of your body weight, your body weight,
if you're increasing,
weight more.
I know, just because we have talked about relative strength ratio on the podcast before as well, so there is a chance.
There is a chance. I mean, chin-ups I don't have to increase weight on the chin-ups. They just keep getting harder and harder every year.
Are you adding slight pounds to your body?
No, I'm not. But like if you're not, like, it's still like, I mean, just from my own experience, like it's harder. Like training, you just don't have the same amount of like oomph to it. Like it takes longer to recover from things. But like if you still, I mean, you absolutely have to keep lifting heavy things and not just succumb to like, oh, I'm older. I don't need
coasting now.
Yeah. Because it goes away quick.
Okay, next question. Is specific TUT important for hypertrophy, strength, etc.? In the past, many coaches used it. Now they say counting tempo and specific TUT as training parameters is not important, while proximity to failure is. As someone who uses it in most of your programs, what's your thought on this?
I just have my question before, because you guys are going to go deep into this, but like, how can you not see that if your set takes you 20 seconds with a given amount of weight versus your set takes 60 seconds, like how can that not have an impact on your strength? That's my question to them. Like, how can time under tension not have an impact like that?
Yeah. It's just like...
Rub your forehead.
No, because I feel like I'm talking about this every week, but it's to me, it's misguidance or misunderstanding of what some of the newer influencer are pushing when it comes to hypertrophy. And again, it seems that everything in strength training now has to be associated to hypertrophy. So now the thing that we know for sure, we've known this for sure for at least 10 years now, is that mechanical tension is the main driver of hypertrophy. Nobody's contesting this. We know that. Mechanical tension is a reflection of load. Not necessarily just outside load, but at least the perceived resistance by the tissue involved in the contraction, which is somewhat related to the load. So now, if mechanical tension is the main thing, what you're looking for with your sets in order to drive hypertrophy is to push the set to a way where you're going to create a lot of tension on the contractile tissue and to a point where you're going to create some form of exhaustion of the recruited fibers. So to do this, you can do this with a heavy as hell 6 rep. You can do this with a heavy as hell to failure 30 reps. And again, this has been shown a few times. You can gain hypertrophy at either end of the spectrum. Now, the part that has been, I'm not even going to say forgotten by this group, but almost eradicated by this group, is the role of mechanical stress. And the thing that, and even like I was watching an interview with Brad Scheinfeld the other day, and he even will say, like he's Mr. Hypertrophy Research, he even says that mechanical stress does have an impact. We just don't really know exactly the parameters in which mechanical stress can create or help in hypertrophy. But it does have an impact. It might not just be as direct, but to me, it does have an impact on nutrient storage capacity, hydrogen ion buffering ability, overall work capacity. So it does have a lot of impact in that sense. So now, the reason why we use time under tension, and we only use it in the context of fat loss specialization and hypertrophy specialization, and we use this in a way to quantify the load from very, very high volume mechanical stress dominant training methods. And we do this in phases where our goal is to create an adaptation through extreme volumes, to drive more work capacity, to improve lactate buffering capacity, to increase nutrient storage mechanism, to increase non-contractile protein within the the muscular cells, and on and on and on. But while we're doing this and switching the pendulum in stress, at least we're giving a break to the loading of the tissue, the loading of the central nervous system. So we're creating a undulation within our periodization model of stressors, knowing that at the end of the day, the reason why we're doing this is to increase load potential, to increase mechanical tension anyways at the end of the day. We just find that you'll get stronger, faster, and improve your ability to generate mechanical tension better if you do an undulating model where you're switching stressor than if all you ever do all the time is pound heavy weight to failure all the time in a very simplistic, one-layered progressive overload component. To me, you're just limiting your long-term potential. Now, if you're using training modalities where mechanical stress is the main impact you're going to get from it, well, then use time under tension to at least have a qualification of what it is you're doing, because then it's like what you were saying. 10 reps in 60 seconds does not give you the same impact in terms of lactate buffering and all that kind of stuff as 10 reps in 10 seconds. Of course it doesn't.
Yep.
You're not under tension for the same amount of time. You're not moving for the same amount of time. How can it give you the same impact? And the other thing that's really important that I think people completely misguide, and this comes from people who have very poor personal experience training themselves, is the longer you spend time training at slower controlled tempos, mostly the eccentric part, the less of a drop-off you'll have in your ability to do 10 reps in 10 seconds or 10 reps in 30 seconds. Like, the weights are going to be quite similar. Mm-hmm. So now every concentric action where now you're creating that mechanical tension, you're doing it with basically the same weight you would normally, assuming you have a good background of training. So you're creating that same amount of stress on each and every concentric action. But now I'm longer under tension because I'm spending more time through the eccentric contraction. So now because of this, hydrogen ions build up. So now you need to be able to buffer lactate. So this is a capacity that you're actually building, that you're actually improving in the bigger picture of athleticism for a weight room warrior, if you want. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you could argue that you're creating even more mechanical stress because mechanical tension, because you have a slower eccentric. If you have a slower eccentric, you have less elastic energy helping you for the concentric action, which means that each concentric action is more challenging, which means that by default, you have to generate more force to displace the load concentrically, which means you're creating more tension, which means you can potentially create more hypertrophy. So there is an advantage of a slower tempo of execution for hypertrophy purposes. Now, do you need to train between 40 to 70 seconds to build hypertrophy? No, I think that's an overstated. This, I would say, is the bullshit part of the whole tempo thing, because you also need to understand that the higher the training age, the less amount of reps per any given intensity you're able to perform, because you're neurally more efficient at recruiting high threshold motor units. So if you can recruit high threshold motor units more and earlier, they fatigue quicker, and if they fatigue quicker, you can't do as many reps. So by default, you'll be doing less reps, which means that your time under tension will be less, but you're still creating an adequate amount of muscular tension to build hypertrophy. So if tempo per se was the only driver of hypertrophy, well, this wouldn't work, but we all know that it works. We all know that that's how it actually happens. So this I would take with a grain of salt. But you cannot completely disregard tempo as a quality or a training parameter, because it can have an impact. It just depends on how you're using it. Because let's say we're doing a tricep, right? And that's the method that I'm using for the phase. Well, I'm using this to create fatigue amongst a wide range of motor units. And then I want lactate to rise. I want fatigue. I want to like use glucose as a fuel, and on and on and on and on. So now, how do I know that this tricep will be more or less challenging than another tricep I did in the past? Well, one way to do it is to look at the series time under tension of that tricep to see, okay, well, last time I did a tricep, my 3 exercises together, I was under stress for 120 seconds. Now I'm under stress for 150 seconds. And instead of having 1 multi-joint, 2 isolation, I have 2 multi-joint, 1 isolation. So now my tricep I know is way more demanding than the previous tricep. So now I have a progression in intensity, if you want, throughout my phases. So I mean, you just need it to qualify.
Yeah, I have 2 things. Steph somewhat touched on both of them, but I always think people, and especially the way this question is worded, sort of took that since we prescribe a tempo, it means that everything we're looking for has a time under tension component, which isn't really true. Yeah. A lot of the times that we're using tempo is to make sure that there is some level of eccentric control built. So especially for the A series that we generally use a 4-0x0 tempo, that is to develop some level of eccentric control. So there's not a massive discrepancy between eccentric and concentric strength, because we should be stronger eccentrically. You're not going to build massive eccentric strength just with a 4-second eccentric, but it will be a good base. And then, as Steph alluded to, because we're doing a controlled eccentric, there's going to be a less elastic energy built up, so there's going to be less momentum generated through the transition between eccentric and concentric. So the concentric will have to produce more force to complete the task. So we're taxing those muscle fibers to a greater extent, which is great, both strength and hypertrophy wise. So just because we write a tempo for everything doesn't mean we're writing that tempo to hit a very, very specific time under tension.
And let's not forget, too, that in the early stages of training, a controlled eccentric contraction of 3 to 4 seconds is basically the foundation, not just for eccentric control, but it's also the foundation to build more collagen within the connective tissue, like the sarcomerogenesis and even the growth of more collagen around the joints is a response from a longer time under tension spent through your eccentric actions. And it doesn't even need to be a supramaximal eccentric here. We're just talking about expending time spent during the eccentric action helps create more layering of collagen tissue. So in the early stages of training, it's super important to build resilient joints if you want to be really, really strong anyways.
Yeah. And then the second point he alluded to was the old school, like, time under tension continuum nearly. So 1 to 20 seconds is relative strength. Can you build hypertrophy training with sets under 20 seconds? Of course you can. But can you build relative strength under 20 seconds? Yes, because you're not going to be depleting as much energy storage, so you're not going to create as much fatigue. It's going to be more central nervous system demand, so it's going to be really good for strength expression. So can you do both? Yes. So it's like, while there was a rationale behind creating that time under tension and what qualities were going to be developed more so at certain stages within that continuum, it doesn't mean other qualities aren't getting built during other times. You don't only build functional hypertrophy from 20 to 40 seconds. You're going to build, like, obviously functional hypertrophy is strength and hypertrophy mixed together, but like, it's one of those that it's such a black and white thing that, oh, my set was 19 seconds, I didn't get any hypertrophy. No, it's not. No, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and because I remember, like, when I was like 14, 15 years old, like, I was like writing programs for fun or to my friends, and I remember when I stumbled on that time under tension continuum, which again, like, it's like the rep continuum, right? It's like, yeah, of course, if you're training between 1 to 5 reps, it's such high load, you'll have a little bit more of a bias towards strength. So of course, if you're training within 0 to 120 seconds, it's higher quality action, so you'll have more strength bias, but it's a continuum. But me, I was so like caught up into this that And it was at a time where like Charles, like in a lot of his articles, would play around with tempos, like slow, concentric, long. It was all over the place. So sometimes I would write a program with, like, let's say 4 reps, but I wanted it to be hypertrophy. So my tempos would be like 8, 2, 5s. You know what I mean? Like I was trying to reach 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Doing too much
with 4 reps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work too. So
yeah, and then then think about the difference of the training response instead of, all right, so we're doing a relative strength training program and it's 4x4, or we're doing a relative strength training program and it's 10x4. Like technically, all your sets are under the 20 seconds. They're in the relative strength bracket, but one of them's going to have far more hypertrophy potential than the other. So it's
so there's so many, like, so this is a volume perspective.
Yeah.
That's
Even
going to drive
beyond
a different
just
response.
hypertrophy, tempo is just like a tool to dictate how much weight you're going to use.
To a certain extent.
Like to a certain extent, if you're training people and you're giving them a program and you want them, like, it's just another thing you can track so that you know the progression of a person. And even like if you're trying to use less weight, then you'll do like longer time under tension. You can play around. It's just another thing that you can play around that it doesn't like. It does have an impact.
But it goes back to these people are mostly only ever talking about hypertrophy when they're talking about it. Yeah. So those are our thoughts on this. And it's not going to change because other people are talking about it now. It's not that we're just being like, this is what we did, this is what we're sticking to. It's truly because it's
but for me, nothing has changed of how I use tempos for at least the last 15, 20 years. Even working with Charles, like, it was not. It's not like he never looked at tempo the way people think tempo is.
Yeah.
So it's one little tool.
I know when you had listened to the interview you mentioned when you first started with, who was that with?
Brad.
This is the one you sent me, wasn't it?
Yeah. Who was that on?
He's more of a nutrition guy, isn't he? He's jacked.
Was it on Thomas DeLauer's podcast?
Yes, because that was on YouTube, but that was a good one for those of you who also want to.
Well, but it was cool because we know that Scheinfeld is like a top hypertrophy researcher, and what was interesting listening to him is how much caution did he tell people when it comes to looking at hypertrophy research, like how metabolic damage, where people are disregarding it now simply because we don't really understand it. So he's saying there seems to be something, but we just don't know exactly what's the mechanism that could lead. So because we don't know, we're going to act like it doesn't exist or it's not a thing. He's just saying that it doesn't seem to have a direct impact. We just don't know enough about it yet. But then again, we know that the immune response or the inflammatory response to training does have an impact, because so many people always talk about making sure that we're not dampening post-exercise inflammatory markers too early, because it does affect protein synthesis negatively. Well, guess what creates a inflammatory response? Well, muscle damage. So it might be indirect, but it's doing something. So it was interesting because he's very more like balanced. And
next question: would you recommend step loading or constant loading when performing contrast training? Example: barbell back squat paired with a reactive squat jump. Is it best to step or constant load the back squat, or is it dependent on the experience and load potential of the athlete?
So it depends on the experience. So like to me, and I don't know if Porrick will agree, but to me, if you're starting out, you've never done it, be really conservative, use constant load and just trying to get better at that lighter load. But once you get really, really advanced, I would say that you're better off using step loading, because you're using the earlier sets as a primer as you keep progressing through your workout.
Yeah, I would agree. The only real benefit of constant loading beyond that would be that you can have a very precise amount of buffer between your working weight and an RM load, so you can count a little more for the level of fatigue. So say someone's really, really strong, you're like, all right, we're doing contrast training, but we're going to be training that we're going to be using 2 reps for our heavy weight. We can then prescribe, all right, we know we're going to do our working loads at 85%, knowing we're nearly a 8 to 10% buffer between what weight we're working at and an RM load, so we know roughly how much fatigue we're going to be generating, and we still know, all right, we're going to be above 80%, so we're still good in terms of a motor unit recruitment standpoint. So there could be use for both, but you could still do that exact same thing with step loading. You just have to plan your steps so your top set is within that buffer, and you can afford to go a little bit closer since it's only one set instead of multiple sets.
So we're only talking about the main lift, like the squat. But
for contrast training.
Yeah, for contrast. So the reactive one is constant.
Yes, generally, because a reactive squat jump, we generally just prescribe 10%.
Yeah, so it's usually it's only the primary movement that you would step load or that you would step load. You wouldn't necessarily step load.
You can. You definitely can. I mean,
because isn't it a percentage of your squat?
Yeah, but so let's say you're really, really well trained, okay, and now you're using contrast training because the heavy lift is a potentiator for the reactive strength lift, and the general wisdom is for reactive squat jump, you're using 10% of your back squat 1RM. So let's say your back squat 1RM is 450 pounds. So you're using 45 pound empty barbell. Yeah. And you're popping out like your reactive squat jump at, 1.25 meters per second. And you're doing really well at it. Well, there's nothing that says, well, you know what? Let's go up to 50 pounds. And see if you can still do 1.25 if you just drop like crazy all of a sudden. Well, if I can still do 1.25, why wouldn't I? Because now I'm just showing that, hey, I can actually exert the same amount of velocity with more load. So why not milk that option if the client can? But I'm just saying that this is like a higher level.
And the reactive squat jump isn't a great example for this, but say it was explosive squat jump was your choice of exercise. You could then, depending on what your overall goal was, so say you wanted to express the highest level of power output. Well, let's start. Say you just use constant load. The big thing you then drive is, all right, did I increase my output from set to set? So I'm going to measure that via barbell velocity or jump height or whatever you want to measure. But say then, all right, the goal of this is a more power force dependent athlete. That's what I want to emphasize. We could step load and increase that load throughout. But it could also be, okay, we want a more velocity output, and then you could actually decrease the load throughout, so you're getting more of a velocity response within the session. So you're just you're nearly getting a contrast within the set and within the exercise as well.
So on a practical standpoint, what he's saying is like, we could have a O-line doing that version, but we're looking for an increase in force.
Yep.
Whereas we could have a cornerback doing the same thing, but we're looking at an increase in velocity.
Yeah, so you can manipulate loads of ways. It's just sort of depending on what you're trying to get out of it. But most people, you don't have to get that crazy. Just measure their output and try and make sure they're improving from set to set.
Let's be fair. Most people shouldn't even do contrast training.
Yeah, but if they are doing it, try and improve from set to set. And if there's a massive drop off in a set, terminate it, because this is all about high quality work. Yeah. It's not about doing work. It's high quality work. So terminate if there's a 5 to 7% critical drop off.
Yeah.
One more question for this episode. Why do we call it an incline or horizontal back extension? It's technically a hip extension exercise. Similarly, why is it called a leg extension machine and not a knee extension machine? I'm assuming because I'm confusing extension of the leg with extension of the hip. Is there a history lesson or story about Russian weightlifting teams that could shed some light on this? Thanks, Bunch.
I mean, I wonder who's asking this question, but it's like it's
just common words like that.
I think he might be doing this maybe a little sarcastically.
Taking a piss.
I mean, I would hope it is, because I mean these are old ass terms thrown by like gym goers. It's not the Russian exercise scientists to name any of these things.
Yeah, that's a joke.
They're like gym goers that, oh, what am I doing? I'm training my leg. So I'm, it is absolutely inaccurate to call it back extension and leg extension, even leg curl.
Yeah, it's more basically it's just the name of the piece of equipment.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the exercise.
The movement. The name of the equipment is not necessarily describing the movement.
Yeah, like
pattern.
I don't know who invented the names, but it's just gym jargon that it's like some people call it chest flies, or my favorite, the double
the side
lateral. Whatever. I don't know. I don't have a clear cut answer for this.
No thoughts.
No history lesson on that one.
That'll wrap up this episode of Between Two Racks, and next week's will also be a rapid fire. If you want your questions included, be sure to submit them in the description below. Thanks for tuning in. Share, rate. See you next week.